Yet again, more technical difficulties. Should definitely keep that with the name of the show. I think it's funny.
Oh, it's already taken. Tom Scott got that with his mates.
Oh, right. I don't even know who that is.
Um, yeah,
You'd be
funny
thinking
guy.
something else.
He
Funny guy,
does.
more
Oh,
interesting.
yeah, other stuff. With a YouTuber worth checking out, Tom Scott's something you might not know.
Probably, yeah. I
No, that's the
don't
name of
honestly watch
his
those.
series.
Yeah. But yeah.
Anyway, what should we
That
talk
is
about
sick.
today?
Well, where were we at last time? We were talking a lot about collapse kind of stuff. I remember a bit of conversation about energy and something else as well. Do you remember very well? It's been a little while for me.
Life's been busy.
Been
Yeah,
busy? Okay. Well, I remember it was quite a pessimistic show. We were talking about
black
sort of
pills,
an
white pills, and grey
inevitable,
pills.
yeah, it was like inevitable collapse kind of thing.
I think
Um,
we agreed on the likely future path, broadly speaking, but disagreed on the root cause. But it was a bit of a moot point what the cause was because both of them were heading in the same direction.
oh, I remember that. Okay, that's interesting. We probably didn't touch on that too much, but I remember that was one of our big arguments from back in the day of why a civilization would collapse. I think it was morality versus resources was our original argument. I don't know if we should go into that though.
It might come down to a disagreement on the definition of the word collapse, because if you interpret it in terms of energy and technical complexity, then the lack of energy would be a pretty solid indicator of that. But if you talk about moral collapse, then morals are obviously the cause of that sort of collapse, because a society can collapse in terms of energy usage without collapsing morally.
Yes, but I also remember that our conversation was around the definition of collapse, energy and resources wise. But my argument was that the misuse of resources was a result of moral decay rather than simply running out of due to expansion, which I think was your point. I don't really want to get into that because we were talking a lot about this collapse. We we're both very sure it was coming, and I'm not so sure anymore. I talked about this a couple of days ago. I haven't actually made a video in ages, but I don't think I've spoken to you about it.
No, I'm interested.
Um, so since I read um, Maps of Meaning, Peterson's original book from 30 years ago or something, I've changed a lot on thinking on almost everything because that book is designed to explain how we see the world and also give us an antidote to all ideologies. And since reading that, I realized that I was mildly captured in one, which is the anti-statist kind of philosophy that that government is only bad kind of idea. Looking at the incompetence of our leadership and the way that our world is governed, I was unquestioning in the idea of the collapse. I thought there was no way that responsible leadership could take hold and therefore right the course, or that a competent leader could actually get anything competent done due to the structure of government, which I then viewed as only corrupt. So that's tyrannical king versus benevolent. I only thought there was a tyrannical one. I didn't think there was a benevolent king in terms of the map. I explained this a lot the other day. I don't know if I should go into it you again. I don't know. How interested are you in the map itself, or do you want to go into the specifics of the issue?
Well, at least broadly, what that brings to mind is the difference between. You talked about a benevolent king versus a tyrannical king,
Mm.
but the advantage of democracy is it's mediocre at both. So if you have a benevolent king who has the right idea, he can do more good than a
Oh no,
democratically elected leader. But
the king is an analogy for culture. It's not literal kingship. The reference to the benevolent versus tyrannical king is a reference to culture as culture as corrupt and tyrannical or culture as functional and protective.
Mm.
It's not about the literal system of it. So when I say I saw our culture as a tyrannical king, even through the democratic process, I saw it as only corrupt, as not offering protection or having opportunity to push our society forward.
Mm.
I saw it as hopeless.
Yeah, okay. I thought you were
Um,
specifically referring to the leadership.
no, no, no,
Mm.
no. Well, yeah, I am referring to leadership, but I didn't mean king as an actual king.
Mm.
Um, what I think I've really come around on is like, yes, our society is morally decayed, and I believe that puts us in an incredibly dangerous place. And then you have the resource problems that we've
Mm.
argued about before, though I think I disagree with you on that one quite strongly due to the nature of technology. But I didn't believe that we could therefore harness that to fix our problems, and that's why we're heading for collapse
Mm.
because of the previous moral decay. But from reading this book, I've seen the process of how a society corrupts and collapses, but also how it is revivified, which it is, and how that process works and how the individual plays a role in that. So I'm far more hopeful actually now
Having
for a
not read the
rebound.
book, is the is the revivification of the society uh, triggered by the process of the collapse and ossification, in the sense of the death provides the fertile soil for the rebirth?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. It is as the society, as the king becomes corrupt, tyrannical, and willfully blind, that an individual will confront the chaos that therefore comes back when that happens, extract out of it useful information, and bring it to the state to revivify it and make it live again.
As every
That
individual
is,
doing that in their own lives, gradually bringing that renewed order back, and then there's a process of which form of order do we want, and people say, oh, that form of order is better, and pick, and then the new form of order comes to,
yes.
yeah.
Although there will be specific individuals who do so more than others.
Of course.
So there will be many people. This is why I think Peterson's always harping on the point of getting every individual possible to be as what morally forthright as possible. Because though everyone does it, everyone aiming at the good will help revivify the society, but everyone who is aiming at the bad will corrupt it, will be playing the adversary role mythologically. So if we can get as many people as possible to get their shit together effectively, then we have a better chance of not collapsing horrifically. The other thing is our societies are built in such a way that, and I used to think this was a really bad thing, is the speed of the cycle. So when we have our election cycles, it's the revolution is so fast. And I always thought that was a bad thing. But now I'm seeing that as a possibility for writing the course to be something that happens rather quickly.
Yeah.
So as we collapse, people realize that someone can get into office if they are capable of convincing or captivating the people, and then immediately write the course far sooner than a dramatic collapse.
Like,
so
if people are willing,
there would be not as far down the
if
cliff.
people are willing to pick a brick through the window like Trump, and certainly there are people who who honestly think that he's a good leader given their own personal viewpoints, but I think a larger viewpoint than that, although this is possibly just my own viewpoint speaking, that he is more of a brick through the window of the establishment that they see as destructive and corrupt. If they're willing to pick that, then if someone comes along who has similar brick through the window of the current system traits, but is also a good leader, then he can get through and if he can competently combat the system from the inside, and he's not the only one getting in at the same time, so there's a voting block within whatever House of Parliament we're talking about, then the potential for change can be very rapid.
Exactly. The way I look at Trump is right, the brick through the window, the bull in the china shop, or even like a pie they'd throw it in the face.
Yep.
That people were sick of the shit and they needed to send a message that they weren't happy. And they didn't have a better candidate. There was no person standing up who was competent and articulated and a good leader. So they picked the bad one to pull the finger.
Yeah.
Which I think was necessary. But no, I'm actually far more hopeful than I was. I think we are in the middle of the collapse already. And because of our information technology, because of the resources we have access to, all those individuals who are ahead of the curve in terms of vision can see that. Like we were talking about that last time about all the intelligent individuals who have checked out of the system. And I think that's a great indicator. Like there are many things that I would rather do than be a farmer. Like I was talking about this with my wife the other day. I would have loved to have been a doctor or a psychologist or even a physicist. But our society has ossified and turned to stone already to such a degree that any of those fields, you are not allowed to be a free thinker without being removed from the field by force, which is the corruption. But because of that, those people who then are still motivated to do such things do so out of the field and build up new structures while the other ones collapse and decay. Like just look at the loss of faith in the medical field at the moment is a direct result of this. You're not allowed to think for yourself.
When you compare that with 10 or so years ago and people talking about modern liberal democracy being the greatest, obviously because specifically of how dissent is open and encouraged and free thought and just okay, you can disagree, yes, you're entirely free to, and then we have it out in discussion, and this is why Western society is so great. And then you look at the present, it's like, where did that go? And just stepping back and being aware of that is something that is valuable.
Yeah, I think that is the key thing. As long as that is the case, then our society will thrive. But it has turned to stone. It has succumbed to a totalitarian impulse.
But stone breaks.
I heard a point from the other day about we are so heavily involved with China, and they are unbelievably totalitarian, that we may be emulating them. That because of that interlinking, we are therefore influenced by them. And when a crisis happens, they act first, as totalitarians do, and lock everything down. And we did the same. We just followed them like sheep. And there's something to say about the people in our society do no longer believe in the core values of our society because they don't understand them. And therefore we just follow where we're led, which is clearly not the ideal. We need the average citizen to be revivified in a knowledge of the process and why allowing or encouraging dissent will give them a better life, and as well as encouraging every individual to be as morally forthright as possible. So those 2 points are effectively the 2 books that I read recently. Morally forthrightness would be from the Gulag book, because if you are not morally forthright, or if you stand in silence or worse yet lie and corrupt yourself, then you're going to end up in a prison like that, and it's not going to be fun. And the other side of things is that you need to make sure that your map has all of the 6 characters, or else when you act in the world as the outward expression of your inner map, you will run into brick walls if it doesn't match properly.
Those 6 characters being primary archetypes?
Yes. Yes. You have the benevolent and the tyrannical for the individual, the culture, father, and for nature, the mother. And each character is actually one character, but split in 2. So you have your individual who is both heroic redeemer and demonic adversary. And then same with culture, you're benevolent but also tyrannical king, and then nature, the great mother, but then also the dragon of chaos, the same thing.
There was an
You have to make
analogy.
sure.
There was
Sorry?
an analogy that came to mind recently, which mirrors what you were talking about there slightly. I got the image of modern society like a guy who's hooked on performance enhancing drugs, sort of mentally and physically enhancing. The analogy being that that's oil, and like, sure, you can have something that lets you do things you would never otherwise be able to do, but if you become addicted to it and dependent upon it, then you become more vulnerable. And it's running out, and the addict knows he needs to get off it because he can see the smoke of these performance enhancing drugs hurting his family, his father, the previous generations, who to some degree are proud of. He feels as proud of the accomplishments, but also worried that things are going wrong. The mother, representing Earth, who's loving but also slowly building in anger, and every now and again there's a fight which would metaphorically represent a natural disaster or climate change slowly coming down upon us, and that the present, represented by the person at the centre of this, will eventually be kicked out of the house by the mother. And then there's the impact on the children, representing future generations. And there's the children who are diving into the drug use to an even greater degree, who will be kicked out along with the present person. And then the child who sees the harm in that and is like, no, no, something else. And then, of course, it can be taken as a balance of all these aspects, acting at once in one individual or one society, but separating them out like that can lead to a bit more understanding. And so the going cold turkey, it seems like the individual who's hooked on these drugs has seen this is bad, and then that was in the 70s. Like, okay, we need to do something about this, and then you get the cognitive dissonance of needing to know, or knowing you need to do something but not doing it, and then it gets to the present of I gotta go cold turkey. And we see that through the actions of the current political classes who are basically cutting off farming at the knees in many cases. And it's like, that's a bad thing, but it makes a lot more sense, at least in this analogy in my head, to look at that through the lens of mental illness. Like, our society is mentally ill, and it's going to take a lot of itself down with it. The harmful and self-destructive elements will get burnt away, but then hopefully the revivified elements that are ready to move forward into something new, the next generation who's not repeating the failures of the last, will be able to keep going through into something new. And the destructive elements will destroy themselves, and so it's just get out of the way and wait for them to do it. Hope that makes sense.
There's a lot to break apart there.
Yep.
I have a lot of problems with what you've just said, to be honest. Firstly, I think your focus on oil as the corrupting influence is a bit ideological. I see very much an externalization there of what a resource that we use that therefore protects and provides for us is the problem. So there's a bit of the benevolent versus tyrannical king issue, as well as the sort of forgetting. Now, I don't think you suffer from this particularly, but there's a hint of it there that's influenced your thinking from the broader ideology that's driving this hostility towards the energy that we currently use, which is the idea that our use of oil or petroleum is only evil, that there is no good from it, and that its effect on the earth is only bad, that we get nothing from it, and that if we only stopped, evil individuals using these resources for evil means, therefore the society, the king himself is evil, doing these actions, who is violating the great mother, who is only good, and there's nothing that comes out of it that's good, which is forgetting the idea of, okay, yes, the king can be tyrannical, but the society has walls for a reason. And those walls are there to protect us from the dragon of chaos that will eat us without them. And those walls are based upon oil in our society.
I agree with
If
what
we
you're
do,
saying there.
yeah, if we do
Um,
not have them, the
yeah,
dragon will come back and eat us alive. It's not a picture of, oh, we're doing this bad thing to society and therefore climate change will kill us. It's that if we remove this from our society, we are talking about the mass chaos. Now, I'm not saying you're saying, but your point about the people who are cutting off farming at the knees, this is their map.
that
You're
is what
much
I
more
was aiming
nuanced.
for. I was trying to
Yes,
understand where they're coming from.
yeah, yeah. I'm not pointing this at you because you mentioned them. This is their map, and you're much more of a nuanced thinker than that. But I think that it's influenced you a little bit, and this comes down to our argument that's always been, which is your focus on resources as the problem, whereas my focus on morality is the problem. So when you talked about society being what an individual juiced on drugs who is consuming, and focusing on the wrong things. I don't think the solution to an individual who is in that situation is removing the drugs. I think the focus is to ennoble the individual. So you have a society full of people
So that they don't need the
who
drugs.
are who are over consuming is the problem, right? The thing of resources that have a negative externality that is not taken into account in the positive, in the effect in total. And your point about this resource running out and therefore catastrophe. So this is another part of what I was saying before about becoming more hopeful, is that I see technological solutions to all of these problems if only we got to act together as a society. Before, I was completely against the idea of using the culture, using the government to redirect and refocus resources to invest in solutions to these problems because of my broken map. But now I see that as a functional part of a benevolent king. So we have these issues. One, I don't think that your description of the immediacy problem of petroleum and oil is quite accurate. I think there's a lot of new,
I think
um,
a lot of
new
that.
discoveries.
Are you referring to my general previously stated opinion of that, or this particular analogy? Because this one was sort of trying to get inside the heads of the current
No, no, no.
leadership. Yeah.
Your statement about peak oil that we made, that you had in the last conversation we had.
Yeah. Okay.
I see a lot of new advancements in technology, like, for example, the reproduction of oil out of plastics. There's a Canadian company that I know about, and I think there's an individual who's taken a wee rig out to one of those big trash islands that have found a way to take old plastics and, through some kind of pressurizing boiling, I think, extract out petroleum from them and then reuse it as petrol. So that's a bonus. I'm not going to say that we don't need to get off oil, but I think it's a difficult one because there are so many people possessed of the ideology, which is we need to stop it now, and forgetting these things are here to keep us safe for a reason. And I find it very dangerous to come out and say, look, these people are right, but if you do what they say, millions will die.
Yes.
It's a hard line to walk.
And that I think I've
On the
struggled
other
with a
side
lot
of that,
in my own head, because I see both
yeah, on
sides
the
of
other
that.
side of that, on the other side of that, you have the technological advancements. The possibility of recapturing carbon out of the atmosphere, which takes all of the climate change issue out the window, therefore would close the loop and oil wouldn't be a problem anymore. Then you have the limited nature of the resource, which is starting to become more debatable than it was. And then you have the renewable aspect of the resource, which we were talking before about. We put oil into everything that we use, everything. And even if we got it out of cars, we'd still need it for everything else. It's not going away. But the idea that you can actually recycle certain things like plastics back into petroleums, then that would make it a far more abundant resource, because we have mountains of that stuff buried around the planet that we know where they are and floating in the ocean, which would give us an economic incentive to go and clean it up.
Yeah.
Which would be, really, really irritating to the environmentalists to find out that the oil companies are cleaning up the oceans because they can get more oil out of it, which I would love. But coffee. I don't see this as a disaster that needs to be averted immediately. I see technology already shifting tides on this one. I see that these things provide so much benefit to humanity that they are far outweighing the cost.
Mm.
And I see the shift from a resource that's running out to a resource that is mildly renewable. But at the same time, when I was talking before about the fact that a state power could use investment to change the tide and aim towards something good, which they are doing at the moment, they're just not aiming towards something good. So great, because they're all focused on batteries and solar and wind and all of these useless technologies.
I think solar has a place, but it's not the place they think it has.
Yeah. Solar is the only one that has value. Maybe that and hydro, as a lot of our country's based on, but things like wind farms is laughable, and the reliance on
wind to mechanical, I think, has a proven history of working. It's like if you
yes. Wind to battery, electrical generation is not so great, and also people who promote those kind of things sort of forget was it you and I who talked about this, the amount of truckloads that are required to cart the parts for such a wind turbine up a mountain.
Yep.
Which is all, powered on oil, and then all of the plastics that build it are powered on oil, and all of the lubricants that are required to keep it going, oil. It's not the solution.
Yeah.
No, I see great potential to have a green future, but I think the doom and gloom catastrophe narrative is going to do nothing but kill people. So this is my hard line, is that I'm trying to push back upon that narrative with everyone I meet, even people like you who are nuanced thinkers, but I still see it tinging your thoughts in a way that you may not be aware of. Because whenever we've had these discussions about oil, it's always been very pessimistic from your point of view about this resource about to run out right now, that there's nothing that we can do about it and that we need to get off it, and that we don't have any solutions, all of which I see as false. And when you have such a catastrophic vision, that therefore justifies sacrifice.
Yeah.
Maybe not in your mind, but in many people's minds it will.
Yeah. And so I can understand a little bit of where the current drive to take control and take immediate dramatic action comes from. But there's a tangent I'd like to go on a little bit. Something I've been thinking of recently sort of working out for a while is the idea that I am wrong, in the sense of whatever I think is wrong. As in, you can say that whatever, if you work out something, because you are a finite, limited human being, it will fundamentally always be wrong. It might be useful, but it will still be not precisely accurate. Like, even if we just use our current understanding of physics, unless you describe an event down to the level of quantum physics, that description is wrong. Like, and if you describe every stage from the top to the bottom in that whole process, like, your description is technically wrong, but it can be very useful. And where things get really interesting is where you take two wrong interpretations. Like, equally as I am wrong, I would, by principle, say that you are also wrong in your own ways. I'm wrong in my ways, you're wrong in your ways, and by coming together, we get a amalgamation that is, there are specific terms for it, but less wrong than either of them on their own. It's a synergistic combination, and I think I focus on the mechanical resource side due to my mechanical thinking style and training as an engineer. You think about the ethical side and the cultural side because of your natural leaning and past experiences. And by bringing these together, each one is the combination is more than twice either of the others on their own. And
Right.
yeah,
Um, I got a point to make on that, which I think is rather important. We should talk about solutions in a minute. I think that was a good way to go. Start to talk
yes,
about positive vision, as there's not enough people talking about positive vision in our world.
definitely.
But you were talking before about always being wrong, and I think what you were trying to say is that no human being can have a map that is complete of existence.
Yes.
And this is something that I definitely learned from maps of meaning, is that you have these 6 characters, and when you look at the individual side of things, the heroic individual is the person who encounters the chaos of the world, extracts new information out of it, and brings it to the society to revivify it. But the adversary, the devil figure, whatever you want to call it, his fundamental spirit, his reason, is that he knows all, or that he can know all, and therefore the heroic individual is no longer required. So if you have implicit in your ideology, not you and say, but in general, or your culture does, if you're in a dangerous place, that all is known or all can be known, that is already incorporated in our culture, then therefore the individual is no longer required, the heroic individual. Our map is perfect, our map is complete, we know all things. So anyone who therefore challenges that with new information, we can just kill them and get them out of the way because they're wrong. Obviously, we know everything already. But even the idea that human beings themselves could know all things, I find to be within that map, that architect of the spirit that denies the role of the revivifying individual. And if that spirit becomes populous enough in a culture and therefore gains control of it through democratic process, then it cannot help but to cull all individuals who have positive vision. So when you look at our society now, I see many, many people who stand up with new ideas and new visions and point out the problems in our society, and they get immediately offed, not literally, but offed in the censorship sense.
Yep.
And I see that as a massive problem. That is the spirit of the devil figure, the spirit of what Mephistopheles is, the person who says, we know all things, or we can, as human beings, know all things in the universe, and therefore we do no longer need the idea of the unknown where there is something to learn from. And as soon as that becomes a majority in the society, it turns to stone and you have a tyranny.
Yeah,
And
the idea that you have the infinite perfect map. If you did have an infinite perfect map that included all of the subtleties of the real situation, then in theory, it could be the only map you'd need going forward. But the fact that we can only know one small piece of the actual reality, and that's one small piece of a constantly changing landscape, we need to constantly rewrite the map. And the old map, while useful, because that worked before, and
yes,
things that you take from there are more likely to work than something you'd pluck from random space. But the things from the old map is certain not to work anymore. So there's the constant revivification of the map that we work from, which is a tiny part of the whole. Yeah.
exactly. That is exactly on the money. The old map is the old king who becomes blind, and then the individual revivifies it with the new information. Your point about the new information is almost always more dangerous and less valuable than the old map is a very good point, which is why we need conservatives more than ever to maintain that which was valuable in the old map. I think I would object to your point in the beginning about if you had theoretically a map that encompassed all things, then therefore you would not need anything new. I don't believe that that is possible.
I was
I don't
thinking
believe
from the
that is
perspective of
possible.
God, like God's map. Not it's
No,
something that would be
I don't,
vaguely possible for anything human.
no, I completely disagree with that as
Okay.
well. Because, okay, you want to talk about, we'll take it to a slightly religious state because
Mm.
you brought that up. As far as Christian God is concerned, human beings are made in his image, which means we have the process of being, well, effectively, to me, that means free will, which means you could not have a map that encompasses a free will being. Because the second you put that map in place, the free will being goes, my spirit's being violated. I must act in a way that is unpredictable by the map.
Yeah.
And therefore, immediately, the map breaks. So I don't even believe that God himself could create a map that would encompass our actions.
It would only work for a
Because,
deterministic universe unless you're talking about it from a eternal
bingo,
standpoint where time itself is viewable as a whole, in which case you're kind of just looking at a record rather than a map.
exactly.
Yeah.
It would only be the case in a deterministic universe, which I do not believe by the nature of human beings. I think that without a doubt we are creatures of free will. And that if such a map was ever put in place, the first thing we would do is break it to prove, who was it that said it was? Can I remember it from the book? I think it was Dostoevsky. That the man would break the map and risk everything he ever has and risk death simply to prove that he is a man and not a piano key.
Yep.
The point that we are creatures of discovery and generation, which we are, not deterministic. Because if we were, we wouldn't learn, fundamentally. And because of that, there is no map that could encompass us, which means we always need this process, which is why our entire being is based upon the map of the process, not the map of the world. Because we see the world, we see the process and how our current world maps onto that process.
One thing that I think, one point that often gets left off these sort of discussions is that the variation of individuals. So I agree with you about the free will going against the predictions just because those are the predictions, going against the map just because it's the map, but it is not evenly distributed throughout individuals. There'll be individuals who manifest that energy and crash through it. There'll be individuals who are perfectly happy being a piano key just because it's simple and comfortable. And there's both at play.
I would disagree with the idea that they're perfectly happy doing that. I would say that those who do that have violated their conscience.
Or too scared
And
to
while
break the mold that they're sitting in.
They're put into the mold, and instead of following their conscience and pushing back on it, they corrupt themselves and follow the map, and in doing so, corrupt the world. But more importantly, they violate themselves and therefore become miserable. I don't think that they're happy doing it at all. That is my conjecture. And that leads back to the Gulag book, which very clearly states is that when people do that in a society, a map is given, they follow the map rather than following their conscience. They corrupt themselves and they stay silent, and eventually the chaos grows, and eventually it comes so close to home that their choice is to then speak from their conscience to that chaos, which will then kill them, or to corrupt themselves ultimately to the chaos and point the finger at someone else. And that's how you have a totalitarian state. That's how a Nazi Germany or a Soviet Russia comes about, is because of that action, because of people not following their conscience. So when we talked the other day, I don't remember if we talked on video, if that was just when we were messaging, your statement of always speaking the truth. And you made the point of, if you have Jews in the attic and the Nazis are at the door, that in that moment, speaking the truth is not always the good thing. You wouldn't be in that position if you had spoken the truth before. So your choice is to stay silent. The chaos grows, and then all of a sudden they are at your door, at which point you can point the finger and go, no, they're not here, they're somewhere down there. Or you can say the truth, in which case you and everyone, you will be killed. But you also demonstrate a resistance. The point is that society would not have come about if individuals had spoken up earlier when it was safe to do so.
I agree that if the society as a whole and individuals within it spoke up as soon as they saw it, that it would be better. I'm trying to find the place in this for growth over time, because no individual will start out with the right approach or the conviction to tell the truth. That sort of thing is gained over time. So rather than this is the right way to act, I'm looking for this is the path towards the right way to act.
Right.
So
I
like rather
think,
than the destination, I'm looking for the compass.
well, the compass is conscience.
Mm. And that
So
is developed and
it
grows over
would
time
come
with
down,
experience.
yes. Okay, it comes down
Do it a
to
bit.
if this individual you're speaking about at the door, who's answered the door and the SS is standing there, I would go, say your assumption is that person was once corrupted and therefore has since developed their conscience to
Mm.
be an uncorrupted person, then in that moment, the individual's conscience will tell him or her what to do.
Mm.
And if the individuals follow that, then that is moral. And if they don't, then it's not.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
we have the spirit within us and it is our job to follow it. I couldn't tell you whether saying the truth in that moment would be akin to the conscience or lying would be. But I am inclined to think that speaking the truth would actually be the thing that the conscience would say
Mm.
to demonstrate a resistance rather than a compliance.
But if you knew the Nazis were coming, getting the Jews out of your attic and into a safer place before you say, yes, I hid them, they're gone now, and then all the neighbours hearing you yelling that would be a powerful statement. Which,
Exactly.
which for a person moving from the corrupted state
Or,
where they're being pushed around towards the following the conscience state, that might not be quite there, but it's like you work your way towards
or
the. Yeah.
they still are in the house, or better yet, sitting at the table behind them, and they put up a violent resistance. I say, yes, they're here, and you're not taking them.
I wonder
Either
what
one,
the.
either one would be better than lying, because this is
Mm,
the thing that I learned from that book is that following the conscience and speaking the truth is more important than any individual's life.
and getting to
That
that point where the principle is more
an
important
individual,
than your own life is a big thing.
yeah, that an individual should sacrifice himself to speak the truth.
Mm,
That in that situation, the individual who answers the door, if they are all that they could be manifest, then they would state that they refuse to work with them. They would make a statement of judgment upon the SS men, and they would lay down their life for their values, even if it means death ensues.
because telling the
Because
truth doesn't mean assisting them. You can say, I'm not going to answer your questions because such and such. And that's.
yeah, I find it quite repulsive to speak to you.
Mm,
It's like I'm sorry, I cannot interact with you.
yep. Sorry, just a
I
minute.
believe it's
Sorry, my computer started going to sleep because I hadn't touched it for a while.
um, yeah,
Yeah.
I think we've covered that well enough. I think
Mm,
what would be a good idea would be to talk about a positive vision
yes,
because
yes.
we've spoken a lot about how last time we had a pessimistic conversation, how I have an issue with that, and then we spoke a lot about the map. I want to speak about things that our society could do. Let's leave the moral side
Mm.
aside because as
Before
far as I'm concerned, action cannot be taken until the morality of the individual in general
before
has
we
been increased
before
and
we dive
higher.
into it, shall we end this as sort of a segment and then do the positive side, the what we can do as another segment? So I just hit the stop record and record again button immediately, and then it
I,
separates it into two videos so people can watch them.
I like to keep it. I like to keep it as one big thing from because then it has a through narrative of
Yeah,
we
yeah.
started where we started before, which was down. We focused on the process, and now we have a vision at the end. And I think if you want to do a separate episode, then I think what we should do is your metaphysics point and have it because it's a separate topic. You know,
Yep, fair enough.
I don't mind having a long show. I mean, it's my day off. I got all the time in the world.
Yeah, I'm
I
keen to
don't know
do
if
the
you have things to.
metaphysics. Yeah.
All right. Well, we can do. I think that should be a separate thing.
Okay.
Well, that'd be interesting. I'll probably need a whiteboard. The last time I had that conversation, I drew this massive map, which was quite hilarious. It was at a workplace house, And me and the guy decided to leave it up there. And the next morning, it took like 3 days for someone to notice it. It was just sitting on the wall. And then it was just one guy who just looked at it and went, "What the fuck's that?" And he went back to his phone scrolling. And that was it. And this crazy map was sitting there and no one looked, which is hilarious. No, okay. I want to talk about a positive vision. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say that a majority of individuals within our society picked up their cross, became morale. Not enough sleep, too much coffee, or vice versa. The individuals became more morally forthright and obeyed their conscience more. And now we have a state, a society where the leadership can act in such a way that is positive. So let's put that as our basis. And let's talk about what positive things could be done.
I think it's worth taking one step back from that, because there's talking about once the leadership's on board, or once people who are on board are now in the leadership, what can we do? That's one thing. But there's also the step of what can we do before then, because there's the possibility for positive change doesn't start when the leadership becomes open to it.
So no, it's the individuals.
Yeah, and by doing the things that lead to positive change, you bring about the potential for the leadership to come in who happen to agree with that.
Okay, so for me, that is encouraging individuals to be all that they could be. So that is the first step. You need to have a society where individuals themselves obey their conscience and who have a focus on, not on themselves, but a focus on something grander.
And a sense that something grander is possible. And people tend to distrust the evidence of their own experience these days, or they are taught to. And if you distrust the evidence of your own experience, the evidence of your conscience, or the testimony of your conscience, however you phrase it, then that keeps you in the current system because that's what you're told to trust. But if you can start to trust that feeling of, yeah, this doesn't feel right doing this, then everyone would start with a tiny step that's in any practical sense insignificant. But if you take one tiny step with an aim in mind, that's, even if it's not aiming up, it's pulling up. It's you're pulling back on the stick saying, there's something not right here. Okay. I'm not sure what it is. I want to make it better.
I don't think there is a conversation to be had on this point. But I think that it actually is going to end up in our metaphysics argument. Because yes. I think this is the fundamental, the foundation for all positive things being possible. But it is not a small thing. I think that if we had this conversation now, it would take up the rest of the show and perhaps a couple hours.
Yep.
Because this is the point of why is an individual in our modern society immoral and aiming at the things that they are, and how do you get them to be moral and aiming at a higher vision? I've been having this argument over the last couple of days with some people close to me, and it's not an easy one, and it takes a lot of time, but it comes down to a lot of the questions of, as far as I'm concerned, it comes down into a belief in the transcendent, or a belief in spirit, or a belief in God, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people who are not religious roll their eyes at that, which was me once upon a time.
And at the same time, people talk about believing that we're living in a simulation, where it's like, what's the difference between a simulation and a creation? It's like the simulation is a created
because universe. In a simulation, their immoral beliefs can still be manifest without being judged. So they can have the belief of the structure of the universe that's the same, but without judgment.
So it's
the way I see
a creation with a blind creator.
There's a bunch of questions, but they don't give a shit what the creator says, because it's not something bigger than us, it's something equal to us. an individual, not something transcendent. The way I see it is there's a bunch of questions of why should I not do what feels good? So why should I not be hedonistic and pleasure seeking? Why should I not use power over others to get what I want? Why do I have value? Why does anyone have value? Why do I care if people suffer, or why do they not? These are a whole bunch of questions that need to be answered in a way, well, in the right way, in order to get a society that therefore aims at good.
Yeah.
This is a point of a lot of the great writers of 1870 somethings, before the collapse into communism and the horrors of the first couple of wars. Is the point that we have killed God, and we won't find enough water to wash away the blood.
Yeah.
So the point is that when you take out the underlying belief that atheists view as nothing but pure superstition, all of the implicit notions that our society is based on fall away. So the idea that the individual has value and cannot be violated, the idea that you have rights, the idea that your words have value, the idea that you cannot use power upon others to get your will, and the idea that your impulsive will and momentary pleasure is not the greatest thing that there is. All of those things are based upon the idea or the belief that we are like something that is transcendent. I think that conversation should be something put aside so that we can focus specifically on. Because any audience who's listened to this is going to be, I think, immediately turned off by that kind of thing. I want to say, we've had a pessimistic vision. We looked at the map to creating a better society. Now, what would a better society's vision be?
Yeah.
I want to focus on that and separate out the moral uplifting of individuals into a different video, because that's going to take forever, as it's like the biggest issue of humanity.
Yep, that's fair enough. I agree. Yeah, so focusing on the step just before the positive leadership emerges, and into that period when the positive leadership has emerged.
Yeah. Let's assume that the majority of individuals in our society are positive and aiming at good. And then let's assume that they therefore vote in a leadership state that is competent and not corrupt. Let's assume that is a given, and then say, what can we do now to put forth a greater vision for the future, given the things that we're aware of?
My mind goes to technical solutions first as an engineer.
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
100%. That's what I want to focus on. That's why I want to separate the morality, because I think that's a philosophical discussion, and I think that's sort of beside the point. Because our vision of the collapse was mechanical as well, as of all of the systems that we have corrupting and failing. And now I want to look at it. What are the systems we could build? What are the technological directions we could go if we could actually invest our tax money without, private islands? Do you have anything off the top of your head that you want to start off with, or do you think I should?
There's that ad campaign that I've glimpsed going around New Zealand called Gen Less, which I think, if we take that idea, and it's the public relations version that's tuned for the current society, but the idea that we need to get by on less and can get by happily and comfortably on far less stuff, energy, stuff, and stimulation, than we do now is key.
That strikes me as a moral statement, not a technological one. The sort of argument of, hey, individual, you should make the free choice to consume less things because X.
Because it will be a better life for you.
Yes, but it's still a moral point.
Yep, okay.
You're a technical-minded person, and we have in the past talked about rather radical technological solutions. That's what I want to focus on.
Okay. Well, the first step to take, this is step 1, where we want to be talking about step 10. But first, if your house has drafts, block them off. Get some foam from the hardware store and block off the drafts. That can cut your heating bill a lot in the winter. But yeah,
That's
things like
the sort of
sorry,
setup. That's sort of the healthy homes thing that's going around at the moment.
yeah, yeah,
The idea of going to almost all New Zealand homes and being like insulated, double glazed, initial investment that costs money, but then in the long run reduces cost.
yeah.
Focus on that.
Yeah, like something that I was thinking of the other night is like take a big old wool blanket, right? Or you know those blankets that furniture movers use to sort of separate the furniture. It's cheap, but it's sort of basically felt. Get a roll of that that's
Yeah.
the size of your window and a roll up top, so it's like roller blinds that slide up and down, except probably a bit bulkier. It slides down, have some magnets along the edge so it sticks to the window frame, and something along the bottom, so then it seals the inside of the window frame, right?
Yeah.
And then that keeps the
Find a way.
warmth in.
You got to find a way to make it beautiful though.
Oh,
Otherwise,
definitely.
no one's gonna. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's got to be something that is attractive to individuals, or even you keep your standard curtains and that's just behind it.
Yeah.
That drops down and clicks in, and then you close the curtains and it looks pretty.
Yeah, well, it could easily clip it up in the top of the window frame, just sit in that space that you don't really pay attention to, just below the curtain rail, and then you pull it
Yeah.
down and it clips on both sides with magnets and clips on the bottom with weight, and then you close the curtains and it's done. And you can have it looking nice and white and things, or patterned, or however you like.
Yeah.
But it
I
also
think
partly fits in it's cheap. It's just a blanket. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not some high tech aerogel.
Yeah. No, see that's a good way to start. Okay. Focus on efficiency then.
Oh yeah.
So
if you don't use
so
it, you
that's an
don't need a
efficiency
generator.
in retaining heat.
Mm.
So, okay. On the topic of efficiency, is there anything else that you have on the top of your head that could be focused upon
Cooking.
in efficiency in general?
Right. If you have a blanket again, you heat up your pot on the stove, get it to boiling. You take it off the stove and wrap it in a blanket. Leave it for an hour. It's still cooking for most of that. Same with a pressure cooker. That'll work even better. Get the pressure cooker up to pressure, and then once it's up to pressure, you take it off the heat, let it stop whistling. It's still over 100 degrees. Put it in the blanket, wrap it up, and just leave it there for an hour. And then your food's cooked. You've used a fraction of the energy. A slow cooker, similarly, it is at a lower temperature, so it's losing less heat. I don't like the design of modern slow cookers that I see because they have no insulation and temperature control, and it's yeah. But you take a slow cooker type thing, just an element that has a temperature control in it. And you can put in fail safes so that if it overheats to some temperature, then it just sort of switches off, and you need to replace a little component to keep it going, like a low temperature fuse that'll break when it gets too hot. But you put that under your pot in the blanket, and it keeps it at 95 degrees or something. And then your food cooks with a fraction of the energy. That's if you're using electricity. If you're not using electricity, say you're using a wood stove, you have a plate of steel that you heat up, and then you put it under the pot, and then you wrap your blanket around the pot, maybe fiberglass. Get a pink bat, get a big industrial sewing machine to wrap it in something that won't get prickly for your fingers, and then a thin pink bat probably, fiberglass insulation, and then
All right.
yeah,
I want to jump in here.
Yep.
Are you able to pause the recording?
Yeah.
Or does it have to start? Can you pause it, please?
Yeah, so there's lots of ways of making cooking more efficient by trapping the heat and letting it carry on going for a while like that. At work, we're trying to bring to market a 5 kilowatt steam powered generator. So it puts out 5 kilowatts of electricity. That'll run pretty much any house. At least the ones I'm familiar with. You could probably find a house that would take more than that, but let's assume it's a house that's already trying to reduce their energy consumption. That puts out heat. Well, there's your space heating. And if you have an absorption refrigerator system, like a gas fridge, it runs on gas. That makes heat. You can replace the heat source with the hot water from the heating system anyway. Then you've got your fridge and your freezer. And so you've got your electricity, your fridge, your freezer. You can have a solar hot water system if you want to as well to reduce the need for energy in the summer. And how many layers of this do you want to make a fully independent system? You have a woodlot of eucalyptus, which can coppice and pick the right species. You chop it down, and then you get usable wood out of it. You have multiple rounds of thinning the coppice, so you leave the best growing trunks to grow into bigger trees to harvest later for profit, while you harvest the smaller ones for whatever they're suited for at the time. The waste from sawmilling that goes into fuel, and then you end up with wood for building products and so on, and building your next house. Um, if you want food, because everyone does, you can. Growing your own food is an interesting one because if you look back at history as a guide to the future, broadly speaking, um, the idea of being able to pay someone else to grow your own food, so paying someone else to grow your food for you, was not universal. Like most of the population had to grow their own food because they couldn't afford to pay someone else to do it. Like these days, we've got Uber Eats and DoorDash and things like that that'll bring it right to your door. So you're paying someone else to grow your food, to cook your food, to deliver your food in a disposable container. Can you afford to pay other people to do all that? Like, how many hours of labour is that? And if you're paying all those hours of labour with your hours of labour, you need to earn well above the average to make that worthwhile as well as affording all the other things. So just do all that yourself, buy some veggies and some meat, cook it at home, and that takes out a whole lot of that. Or have veggies growing like carrots, potatoes, cabbages, and eggs, and combine that together. That's not a big investment to get that lot going. You don't need to do the meat yourself. You can outsource that a little bit. You can have half a pig in the freezer or something, and la-di-da-di-da. There's
So,
if people actually decide to restructure things, it's eminently doable.
right. So this is all very individual focused.
Oh yeah.
One question I have is about your steam engine home generator / heater in the same way.
Yep.
I'm assuming you could use something like a convection heat pump to have the steam engine heat generation thing outside, and then use some kind of air tubing to push the heat in and out without actually having to have it sitting in a room somewhere.
I'd have
So
water
put
tubes. Transfer the heat with water.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, something like that. What is the fuel for that? Because I seem to remember when you were talking about the steam engine for trains that you were talking about, which in my mind is far less practical than this one. You were talking kind of compostable matter almost as the fuel source.
Yeah, wood.
And that, so just wood powered.
Yeah.
Okay.
You could burn your rubbish in it.
Yeah.
It'd have to be set up to do that properly, and we need to do tests to make sure that'll actually work without bad emissions. But if you've got paper waste, throw that in. If you've got wood waste, throw that in. If you've got plastics, maybe not. Suspicious of those, because some of them contain chlorines and bad things that combine under high heat and do stuff. But
if we get the oil recovery from plastics thing going, then we won't be using plastics for heating.
Yeah.
We'll be trying to pull the oil out of it.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good idea. Is some form of generation of energy that is on site for every house that is cheap and efficient. I think even as pure backup, some kind of investment in that on a societal level would be unbelievably valuable, especially if such a thing is rather cheap to create.
If you're looking at it compared to a petrol generator as an emergency generator, so it's used once every few years for a couple of days, it doesn't make economic sense. It is more expensive to produce a steam one than a modern petrol one, just because of the economies of scale of petrol and how the technology has been refined and developed with modern production techniques. So they're churning them off the production line by the thousand.
Right, but that's something that we could be switching around temporary.
Yeah.
Like that's only a statement of, yes, this is the case right now.
And as oil prices go up and supply chains continue to be disrupted, the ability to have a local machine shop get some drawings off the internet, which happen to be on that day, and produce...
Okay. I'm gonna hold you up right there, because you're focusing more on the collapse scenario again.
Yeah.
I want to focus on a functional society.
Yeah. So any machine shop, given appropriate drawings, can build one.
Yeah, I can't get oil from my local lumber shop, which is I can walk to. I can walk down the road and I can get firewood, and almost anyone everywhere can get firewood pretty close by. Oil is logistically hard to move, all kinds of trouble there. Firewood is a particularly inefficient source of energy, but if you're talking about what? Okay. Have you guys done the math on energy in to energy out for the system design?
Are you
So you
referring
get all the
to? Are you referring to the human energy, the effort put in to manufacture it versus the energy you get out of the drive shaft, or you and the energy to manufacture it versus the
no,
sort of
no,
energy to make the steel?
manufacturing aside, because that's an efficiency
Yep.
process that changes. I'm talking about you have one of these things, you put in
Mm.
certain energy to get it started, and then you get energy out to run home, and then that's
So
you could
the
say that's
effort,
multiplied by the efficiency savings compared to
yep.
other systems.
So the effort to go to the woodlot, get the wood, bring it back, shove it in, and then get your energy out.
No, I'm talking about pure joules of energy.
Okay, if you look
Investment energy
at the
into the
now,
versus energy out.
I'm going to go off the material that we're drawing from because we're not reinventing the wheel. We're very much doing the opposite of reinventing the wheel. We're taking what very experienced steam engineers from the twilight of the steam age were developing then and saying this will improve efficiency a lot and this is the numbers that we achieved in these test locomotives and so on. So they were getting up to 12% in some cases. I
What 12% out over?
12% of the fuel energy going in converted to energy at the wheels going out.
That seems incredibly low.
Modern diesels, diesel electric, depending on the figures you get, it's hard to get figures. 20-30%. Modern petrol, 30% tops. Diesel engine on the road, possibly 35. The very, very sort of peak efficiency that you get out of a co-generating multi-cycle steam turbine with Rankine cycle heat recovery in a power plant, that's sort of the top, that's 50%.
Okay. Well, it seems rather. I don't know. It seems small scale. It seems very useful in some kind of fracturing society where you have small scale villages who do not have access to a nation's resource. It seems like unbelievably valuable. But
Or a remote
if
community
you
that can't get the grid. I think that looking at the
think,
joules of chemical energy in versus joules of work energy out is the wrong analysis.
all right, enlighten me.
If you have some trees that you plant, right, you put a certain amount of energy into planting the trees, then they grow for a while, you come and harvest them, you chop it up into appropriately sized lumps and put it in your generator, or you get some sort of other product, building product out of the trees and then use the waste to power the generator. A more useful analysis is the ratio of the energy you put into getting the wood to the energy that you use to run the generator. So if you had a steam powered tractor, for example, could you get enough energy out of the steam powered tractor, enough useful work to make running it worthwhile based on the effort it took to fuel it, and then you still need to get some useful work done. In terms of return on investment in that sense, we're at about approximately 10 to 1. That was Sam's analysis.
Okay, that's the number I'm looking for because that's the scale that I understand.
Yeah.
10 to 1. So okay, that's not great, but I could imagine at the same time that it's rather cheap to make compared to other forms of energy.
In terms of cheap to make, if we compare it to solar, that's probably a good analysis because people
Yeah, that's
think of
like
solar and
six,
understand it.
1 to 6 or something, isn't it?
Depending on the
Solar
system
was.
used, for a solar panel itself, probably if you include a battery system, it's 3 to 4 to 1 over the lifetime of the solar panel system.
Yeah, that
So
sounds about right.
So
From
if
what
we
I'm
take
aware of.
3 to 1 in a 25-year lifetime, you could stretch the lifetime. The efficiency the return on investment might be slightly higher and so on. But let's take 3 to 1 because it makes nice round numbers. If you take 8 years worth of production from the solar panel plant, then put that on its roof, then it can use that energy to produce its yearly production. So you need 8 years worth of production from one solar panel to pay back the energy that went into producing it, and then you've got another 16 years of production left. That's the three to
Right.
one.
So where do you see this technology that you've focused on, the steam engine technology? ideally, where is it most valuable in the society? So we have a functioning society, we have competent leadership. Where is this valuable? Where is it better than over other technology sources?
The first place where it seems to make economic sense, because we're a startup, we want to be a business, we want to sell this to people. So the first place is that.
Forget all that.
Okay.
Say you had investment resources of the nation itself, the state, and you had sufficient manufacturing process to be cheap at scale. Where in the society would this be useful?
Remote communities that are not already attached to the grid are one that comes to mind first, because you can either run the power line out there that through difficult terrain and so on, or you can just plop one of these there that provides the heat and power and all the hot water they need and so on. And then they can have local wood production to run them in a small scale. Pacific Islands are a prime example as well. They import all the oil to get their motive power, their electricity, and so on. If you can replace some amount of that with locally grown biomass, then that's great.
So this to me is a rather get off the ground support for the third world kind of technology, something that could be distributed en masse to lower income communities without an electric grid already.
It certainly fits that. Another place where it fits very well is farming. If you have, with low oil prices and sort of consistent supply and consistently low prices, it doesn't make as much sense. But given the recent disruptions we've seen to oil supply and production and so on, the prices bouncing around, it makes more sense. If you have, now, the figures that Sam's got on the website are 2% of the land in fuel production, so woodlot. Then you can run a normal cropping farm to produce the food without importing oil or diesel to run the tractor. It's a simpler mechanical technology, so it's more easy to maintain than a John Deere tractor.
Well, the prices on those things, that's a whole other. They're not a great company for that.
Yeah. And let's just say that we wouldn't have a satellite connection to the steam-powered tractor to switch it off if you stop making your repayments.
Yeah, we wouldn't be stealing all the data of the mapping of your land.
Yeah, so having a locally maintainable and locally fuelable tractor as well, like a dairy farm with a dairy shed, you have a power cut, you start up a diesel generator or hook a PTO of a tractor up, which is just a diesel generator. If you have a steam engine like this, because it's an internal combustion engine, it doesn't need a clean fuel. You can chuck your waste in. You could get methane off the effluent ponds and pipe that into running this. Working out the details of that, that's a future thing.
Your effluent pond is always really close to this bed anyway, so if you have your base generator there, then you have almost a closed system.
Yeah.
And burning methane is pretty efficient, if I remember rightly.
In terms of carbon production, CO2 production per unit of energy, yes?
I don't know. I mean, heat out for energy.
Well, in terms of kilogram burnt for unit of heat out, yeah, because there's a lot of hydrogen in it compared to carbon in the molecules.
Yep, that's what I was meaning.
Yep. Yeah.
So you see this as a viable replacement on small scale for petroleum?
Yes.
I actually agree with that. I think that an investment in that for a nation would be valuable. Do you see it running a car by any chance? Because the one good thing about petroleum is that it's incredibly energy dense. So you can transport it around.
I'd see it running a bus, not a car.
Okay.
In the sense that you could build a vehicle to use one, right? And one of the sort of, hey, won't that be cool? Yeah, let's do it when we've got a developed product and so on. A steam bike. It's like, oh, that'd be cool. It probably won't be practical, but it'll be cool. So it's like you can go small with it. But
so I see this as a low-tech solution to the theoretical oil problem, but it doesn't seem to me to be as good as oil, assuming. So if oil wasn't a limited resource, if it wasn't going away, then this solution, to my mind, would be worse. Would you agree with that?
Yes, for
Okay.
commuter cars, right? For diesel electric versus steam, it's a bit more nuanced. Steam
Okay.
went out
So,
of fashion from politics rather than from economics and
yes,
physics.
I can actually rather agree with that. If you have a fixed generator, that therefore you could get energy from a local source from lumber, then it is far more valuable. But for in terms of something that a generator like an engine that moves, that needs to be mobile, then the density of the energy source is too high. It's not too low. It's not dense enough to be transportable.
Mm.
Like for say a fuel tank in a car, you can carry a lot of joules of energy
Oh
in
yeah.
a 80-liter tank or whatever.
Oh yeah.
Um, but the other problem I have with this is that okay, you said it was something like 1 to 10 in to out. Our current energy of petroleum is like something like 1 to 30, roughly. I don't remember exactly.
Depends heavily
Something
on
like
which
that.
type of oil you're talking about. If you talk about tar sands and fracking, that's one end of the scale. If you talk about light sweet crude, that's the other end of the scale.
Yes, yes. So it's very varied, and like you say, there's a lot of trouble with the oil industry.
Mm.
Um, when talking about positive vision, though, I see this as a rather short-sighted solution. To be entirely honest, I see far more potential in more modern technologies than in this. But
I think my vision for the
if
future does include the collapse side of it in the sense of a simple technology is locally buildable. So I've had the
yeah,
image of a milling machine, a lathe, and a steam engine to power the two of them, and that's in one community, and then they can build one of the same using all that for the next community over.
right, whereas I'm no longer using the collapse as the basis for my vision of the future. So we'll probably have disagreements here. I see that as incredibly valuable for developing nations.
Yeah. So we've gone
They,
from you thinking it's going to do that, and I'm thinking it's going to do that, to you thinking it's going to do that, and I'm thinking it's going to do that. So we've swapped positions in a
no,
sense.
I think we're going up. I think we're in the middle of a collapse, but that we have the potential to right the curve and go up to a rather positive future. Think about the amount of people that are intellectually open-minded versus history.
Hmm.
Think about the amount of information that modern individuals have access to. Now, we have the moral corruption problem, which I don't want to get into, but I see potential to revivify the state. And if in doing that, we're able to do that, which is the big fundamental question, then the technology that we have access to and the investments that we could make into that could make such an amazing future that it is what? Almost unbelievable.
I think
The question is whether we can have that happen.
I broadly agree with that with some strong caveats. So I haven't studied the history properly, so my timeline might be off here. But ancient Rome built on ancient Greece, right? So the invention of classical logic in ancient Greece fed into ancient Rome. In the same way, we are the first society to get most of our energy from non-muscular sources, right? So first it was all human muscle, then they brought in beasts of burden, and then it added animal muscle, and then we got water wheels and windmills for grinding grain and so on. We got steam engines and so on. The ability to get energy to accomplish a task and do work from physical sources through physics, basically, rather than from muscles, is a new thing. And future civilizations, future cultures will have access to that. And I think that the cultural descendants of our modern civilization will, to greater or lesser degrees, make use of that. And so I think that the revivification that you're talking about as part of that process will probably change things dramatically. But I don't have personal hope for going up from where we are now. I have hope for the size going down and then the quality going up once we
Right.
reach bottom. But the increasing in size from where we are now, I don't have confidence in. But that's even if I take that view, I still think there is a place for the steam engine technology I'm helping to develop. Whether that place is becoming the prime energy source of the remnants of our civilization, or helping as an energy source in the places it's most suited to, like Pacific Islands, like remote communities that can't get power lines to them easily, and so on.
Hmm.
Like I think most of the tractor market is globally. If you look at numbers sold or even value sold, it's little walk behind tractors that have a just a few implements attached, and you walk along behind it. You hook it up to your cart, and you can drive that to the nearest town to sell stuff, like that sort of thing. Possibly making that steam. I don't know. Like there's
Okay. Um, Based on what you're saying, you see that there is a positive turn, but that there is a massive hollow first, and that it's going to take a long time.
I think the positive turn could happen before the hollow, but I don't see a way to avoid the hollow in the magnitude and the energy side. So I can see a moral uptick before the energy hollow is finishes, which would
Right. So
make it much better.
this is based upon your pessimistic view of oil.
Yes.
That is the fundamental philosophy holding you to the pessimistic collapse.
Yeah, which is a disagreement in facts that we have.
Right. Um, I don't think it's a disagreement in facts.
Mm.
I think it's a disagreement about the. Oh, no, disagreement. I think it's a difference in faith in humanity.
Yeah, I probably don't have as much faith in humanity as you since your latest revelation.
I've always had a lot of faith in humanity, to be honest. But yeah, perhaps. No, I think definitely from the Gulag book, my faith in humanity has gone up unbelievably. The amount of stories he recants of individuals undergoing torture that you couldn't imagine unless you had read it,
Mm.
and not corrupting themselves, and in doing so, actually breaking the prison system itself and eventually the government until it all collapsed. I see that as an unbelievable white pill. That the capacity for individuals to make unbelievable change when adhering to their conscience rather rapidly,
Mm.
even in the darkest of places, as incredibly positive. Yeah, I think it's based upon your philosophy of the collapse of oil, and that being is what?
Non-negotiable.
Yeah, is like catastrophic. I don't know the word.
Mm.
Being as catastrophic. There we go. As you envision.
Mm.
I was hoping that we could. Okay, so you see this in the meantime, and then you see an uptick in the long run. Do you see a positive vision uptick in the long run, or are you seeing a collapse into local community, and then a remainder there that we don't build back up again?
Fundamentally, I see it as fractal. So some places will do. There'll be places that do each. So there'll be areas that collapse all the way down to just wasteland through either social or environmental causes. There'll be areas that have the moral and cultural uptick to climb out of it in a moral sense, but they'll still be restricted by energy. Like the energy budget will be the incoming solar radiation captured by plants, predominantly. Some degree of solar electric, but the solar energy captured by plants is the main limiting factor. And that's why I don't see the steam, even if oil went away entirely, I don't see steam replacing it because we can't grow enough wood. Fundamentally, there will not be enough wood to replace the amount of oil we use now.
That's an unbelievably pessimistic view of humanity. To make it hard to get out of bed in the morning.
I've been staring at this dragon in the face for a few years, yes. Yeah, not so much getting out of
But
bed, but late at night, it's like contemplating
I,
the horror of the future and the idea of all the things that make life so comfortable now just going away. It's like how many houses with heat pumps? What if the electricity goes away and so on? And yeah,
okay. So that's a lot of fear of the dragon of chaos, and you have that fear because you do not believe in the ability of the benevolent king to protect and provide for the society as a
yeah.
defense against that chaos.
I see the current
And that is
walls of the garden and defenses against chaos steadily crumbling and cracks widening,
right.
and
Here we go. This is the key.
yeah,
Our society is in the state of the old and blind king, the tyrannical one who is willfully blind. And from what I can get from your image, you don't believe that the individual, the the redeemer, is capable of redeeming that state. That
I don't
you see
believe even
corrupting.
even if a moral king comes to power within the metaphor, I
No,
think
that's
there
not
are
right.
not enough soldiers. Even if a okay,
That's not the
even
right.
if that problem was solved, it doesn't solve him not having enough soldiers to order to fix the wall. So I think there are more cracks
Mm,
in the wall than soldiers to fix the cracks, and so you need smaller
I,
walls.
I don't believe that at all. Okay. So this is how I see your map. I see a map of yours which does not contain the eternal redeemer, which is funny because you're attempting to embody him at the same time. Rather interesting. You have the benevolent mother, which you see as being wounded by oil process. You have the dragon of chaos, which you see as looking through the cracks in the wall, waiting for a big enough one. You see the tyrannical and willfully blind king, which is the cracks in the wall, effectively, the corrupt and dead state. Um, am I right in saying that you lean towards the notion of theoretical complete map, that all things could be known? Because what I see is a lack of belief in the idea that a state could come about which could erect better walls that could be protective and provitive to the individuals and hold the chaos at bay. And I see a denial that a redeeming individual is able to make such a state out of the corrupt one.
There's a sort of there's nuance. I don't think that the redeeming individual would be able to replace the walls where they are now and bring back the fertility of the whole garden as it stands now through the revivifying process. I do think that the redeeming individual and the embodied redeemer and the good king can make gardens within the garden, if that makes sense. So the old walls are crumbling and the stone to shore them up is in short supply, but within the space that was all garden before, smaller gardens can be made.
Right. How does that map possibly reconcile with the history of humanity, where the walls themselves have gotten bigger, more expansive, and encompassed more garden, while the chaos itself has been held at more bay exponentially?
That depends on what time period you take your trend line on.
All history.
If we look at all history from as far back as we know, where it does get blurry as to where it actually was, through to the present, then the amount of variation within it is more than the change over the total, to my
You can
mind.
have a waveform that is, you can have a pattern that is up and down, but that still trends up. So you have, so okay, let's be nuanced on your map. You have the corrupt outer wall. The Redeemer comes in and builds a smaller inner wall that is not corrupt. This is your
Yes.
map, right?
Yeah.
Right. That map, that inner wall, over time grows outwards
Yes.
via the Redeemer to the point where it is beyond the older wall.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, it couldn't be any other way. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. We'd still be in caves.
Yeah. Doesn't always reach the outer wall, but the former foundations of the older wall can be used, and over time, the furthest extent ends up getting larger and larger with time.
Yes, yes, that's my point.
Mm.
So, yes, we may collapse in the short run in terms of your vision, though I don't think we're actually at that point. But over the long run, we will grow once more to be beyond where we are now. Because that is the map that you see. I see a what? An irreconcilable. Irreconcilable. I see you holding two beliefs that are opposite here.
Mm.
That
I
what we
don't
will
think we'll
collapse,
do it the
but
same way. I don't
like
think the.
will we regrow to be beyond where we are now? Assuming your collapse.
I think sometimes the wall's big over here, sometimes it's big over here, sometimes it's big down here. It's like the total extent rises and shrinks, and we may reach the same total extent in the future, but I don't think it will be in the same place as now. So, what I mean by that in more literal terms is we're using up the oil, and I don't think we'll ever get international air travel back to its former extent. And as it declines and drops out, I don't think we'll ever get it back full stop. We might have sort of heads of state flying around in ethanol fueled aircraft, but we won't get commuter air travel. Um, Ships, probably. They've been proven to work. Um, in terms of extent of civilization, like if you look at Victorian England and the British Empire, that garden is of a similar extent to our current American-based system,
Okay,
although
no,
not running on oil as much.
I'm going to object there and put in the caveat of technologically.
Hmm.
The walls, as in terms of technology.
So you're referring to the walls as the extent of technological complexity?
Well, the technological defense against privation and chaos itself. Do
What
you
is it
see
that
that as where
what
we
is
are
it that
now?
defines the extent of the walls relating
Well,
to literal experience?
this is an analogy. My point is that throughout all history,
Hmm.
we have, if you put aside the Younger Dryas
Hmm.
question, throughout all history, privation has gone down, overall trends. Technology has gone up, overall trends, and the suffering of the average individual has gone down. The amount of resources they have access to has gone up. The quality of their life in terms of material
Hmm.
possession or lack of material privation has gone nothing but up. Starvation down, energy access to up, electricity, all of this. In your analogy of empires rising and falling, they grow, they corrupt the outer ring, a new one is formed within it, maybe not in the center, but in a separate spot, and then it grows out again. This is your analogy. But I have always, in my image, you can put aside the morality issue, which I'm trying to, because I want to look at
Hmm.
technological solutions, because that's the way that modern people think. Um, the new system, the new society always outgrows the older.
No.
No,
I would say it
not
is
that.
possible.
Always is not the right. It trends to over all history.
I think the noise in that signal is far larger than the signal itself. Like the distance between the peaks and the troughs. Like if you look at Europe, with the peak of the Roman Empire and the fall of the Dark Ages, there's a period of several hundred years where almost nothing happened in a historical sense because people were just struggling to survive. Illiteracy was most of the literacy was a very rare skill. The only people who sort of kept literacy alive to some extent were monks in monasteries who were even more impoverished than the surrounding population and devoted their lives to the service of God, and that's how they accepted the impoverishment.
Yes, but what happened after that?
And then you had the Renaissance.
Bingo.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that there's an element of random walk involved, and or Brownian motion. Like there's a random element to it, but for the foundations of the former wall provide fertile ground for new walls and new gardens. And you'll have a scatter of gardens come up all at once within the old area, and then they end up conglomerating into smaller numbers, and then those break down, and so on. It's a continuous cycle, like big trees growing in a forest, then falling down, new small trees growing, then one gets biggest, and so on. But scraps of aircraft, right? A piece of aircraft wing that shows the shape of an aerofoil as an artifact in 1,000 years. That piece of information there is like that shape. Let me see. I will think I can build it out of wood. Let's see. Oh, it pulls itself up.
So,
It holds itself up through the air.
well, I think even though you haven't said as much, you don't believe that we will ever get back to where we are or even go beyond it, even though you see that that is what has happened throughout history.
It depends on how you measure it. I don't think that we achieved the same technological feats as the ancient Romans. I don't think that future civilizations will achieve the same technological feats that we have now. We don't know how the ancient Romans made their concrete. We know a lot of things, but we don't know any of their music.
Yeah,
Um,
but we don't know. We don't need to know how the ancient Romans made their concrete because we
that's
have materials that are sufficient to outdo.
Yeah. My point is that not everything is preserved. There is a
Yes,
lot of
no,
loss
agree,
along the way. Scraps
agree.
accumulate, and like the scientific method passed into the future will be an enormously powerful tool, just as classical logic was. And that sort of
Right.
thing will go forward into the future. So we don't, not everything is preserved, but scraps are preserved, and the every cycle of growth and decay of a garden and falling of the walls enriches the core fertility of the land within the metaphor. So
Yes, I see this as this is difficult because you seem to be and fighting the idea that we could have a technologically sufficient society that's greater than where we are, where we could have more energy, more ability, more technology than where we stand, even if we go through a collapse in the first place.
because I see that the quantity of energy we have now is based on a finite resource that is running out and will not be replenished within the lifetime of the human race as we know it.
Right. So there's your pessimistic world vision. You don't see any other technology that we have that could potentially put out more energy than we have that could replace
If
this.
we
If
exclude free energy technologies as a unknown, like possible, I don't know. If true, I fear for the consequences because of the potential of moral collapse in future civilizations and similar destruction to the present manifesting itself globally.
right, so this is a lack of faith in the redeeming individual. This is my diagnosis of
I
your
think my view of
map.
humanity as a whole, like, you're taking a trend to the future. I'm not expecting any trend, and this I think touches on the metaphysics, right? So to touch on that for a little bit, if you take humanity as a whole, you kind of expect humanity to grow over time and become more with the lessons of the past. The metaphysics that I think is informing this in my personal worldview that's missing from the conversation is the idea of um, reincarnation and human souls rising into the human stage and then passing out of it, and their growth being lost to the whole of humanity. It's like a preschool does not progress. The individuals within a preschool grow and progress and then graduate out, but it's still a preschool. And sure, the preschool can change over time and can grow and shrink and so on, but it's not. It's a stage. It's not a progression on its own.
Okay, I find that hard to reconcile from what? From starving in the fields, from basic agriculture to an age with nuclear reactors. I find that hard to reconcile the idea that the preschool doesn't change.
You're drawing a line there from the peak of one wave to the trough of another.
No, this isn't a single wave. This is thousands and thousands, which is the point you make of empires rising and falling.
Mm. There is a
We
Brownian,
are
a random walk
point.
type aspect on top of this. There are more and less optimal places to be in the possibility space for humanity as a whole. And I think we've, over time, through exploring and learning the lessons of what happens from being in certain areas of the possibility space, we've developed ones that slowly work better. And by having more history to draw on, you can have more lessons to apply to the new situations that emerge, which is done to a more or less competent degree. Uh, but I think that the
So,
the
as far
growth of
as I'm concerned,
individuals doesn't bring the society with it. So sorry, you go.
say that last line again.
The growth of individuals is a continuous process and doesn't necessarily bring the society with it, because as
Ah,
some individuals
there it is.
grow, there are also
There it is. Yeah,
yep.
that is the denial of the redeeming hero. That the individual who grows cannot revivify the state. I see that as the hole in your map.
Mm. Yeah, I don't have faith in the individual being a sufficient force for good to change the path of the society. I see the path of the society. This is probably more an emotional
Yeah.
view than a logical view. The path of the society is fixed, and an individual can affect other individuals, but not steer the whole. The whole has enough momentum that while the path may be able to be adjusted, you're not going to be able to get the whole lot to turn at once.
Okay, what steers it then?
To a large degree, momentum
Momentum from what direction?
from the previous direction.
Where did that direction come from?
The sum of past individual actions over time. Yeah.
Ah, individual.
You found a
See,
sensitive axiom to poke.
mm-hmm. Well, this is what this book did to me, is that it exposed that all of our axioms are maps of some interpretation of these six characters. And that if you do not have all six characters in their proper place, then your map is corrupted, and as you act in the world, it will corrupt you or the world around you, or you will simply not see the world properly and hit it in an uncomfortable way. I see that as the hole in your map is the lack of belief in the redeeming individual to revivify the state, which is why you cling to the notion that our modern state cannot therefore be better than older states, because how could it be if the individual could revivify it and make it better?
When you say the revivifying individual, is that a metaphorical messiah-like figure, or is that the actions of every individual within their own sphere of influence?
Both. It's an archetype. It is the messiah-like figure, but literally it's every individual.
And I suppose to become the messiah-like figure for the society as a whole, you start revivifying the area around you, and then your sphere of influence grows, and others see the value of your revivification, and that elevates your potential to do so elsewhere.
So I see you having this contradictory belief within yourself that I don't think you've reconciled. So you have this map of the world that does not have the revivifying individual, and therefore tends towards collapse. But in the same moment, you are acting out that archetype by focusing your energy, your time onto creating solutions for the world that you see. So you have this map, but then you yourself are acting out that revivifying individual while also denying its existence. The collapse is inevitable because individuals cannot steer the ship, but I will dedicate all my time to trying to make the world better for those who are there in the collapse, which is what the individual does. You are acting it out. Like the daily activities you have, instead of choosing to make money, you have chosen to work with the company to provide a solution for a problem that you see, which is not to benefit you, but to benefit society itself.
I certainly don't have faith, not speaking as a logical statement, but as an emotional statement. I don't have faith in having the power to change the course of society. I see that as a predicament where the end result is somewhat baked in. The details at the individual level I see as still flexible, and so that's where I'm applying my effort.
Right. Side note, sorry, my battery. As a side note, your comment about this is not a logical but an emotional feeling. You have more information in your emotions than you do have in your logic. As a note, rationalization is the smallest part of your knowledge. Yep. So it is the one that we've clung to. How about faith in yourself? Because you do not have faith that the individual can revivify the society. I find that hard to reconcile with the fact that the society is not always corrupt and tyrannical and broken. Because if the individual could not revivify the society, then the society would always be stone and tyranny. But stone and tyranny cracks under the moving nature of the world. Therefore, it would always be collapsed. Therefore, it would not sustain. Why do we have a society if it is broken? And why are we not consistently visited upon by the dragon of chaos, which would happen as the walls collapse? You made the analogy of the walls collapsing, but in order for them to be collapsed, they would have had to be built properly in the first place. They would have had to be a wall there to be collapsed. And that would have only come about through the action of individuals.
An interesting free association that came up as you started that, the faith in the ability to... I apply my efforts towards revivification, what a word, or at least towards the good as much as I can understand it. But my faith in... But how much I trust myself to have that... Now, what is it? I want to be good, but I don't know how much I trust my current goodness. And I possibly extend that psychologically to the society as a whole. Some of this may have emotional roots in things said by my ex.
Yes. Yes, I can see that. I think we're very quickly wandering into the moral realm of the individual, which is something we should do, because that is the conversation before that is necessary.
Possibly another time, because I need to head off soon to continue with life, and your battery's running out.
Okay, so I will say, in closing, that I wanted to talk about a positive vision for the future, about technologies that we could implement, but until we address this issue, I don't see you capable of having positive vision for the future. Your collapse vision is not positive. And you can dress it up as pretty as you like, as being harmonious with the great mother in nature. But she is also the force of plague, famine, and death, red in tooth and claw. And she's going to be there just as much as the pretty side.
Intellectually, I think I wholeheartedly agree.
But emotionally, your map is trying to ignore this. Your vision for the future is not a positive one. And I don't think you're capable of having a positive vision for the future without a belief in the redeeming individual. And then that brings up the moral questions of why an individual would be redeeming. How could that happen in relation to your own questions about morality? So we would have to have a moral conversation before we can even go and talk about the technological benefits of like carbon recapture or nuclear energy or a positive vision of the future, which I would love to do, but that's not going to happen.
Why is that not going to happen? Just time today, or?
I don't think you're capable of it.
That sounds like an interesting challenge. I'm not sure if I want it to be broadcast to the internet.
I think there are a lot of people in your shoes, and perhaps a bit of self-sacrifice might go a long way.
True.
To helping others. If it can help you, why not help others?
Very true. Maybe we will record it and then I'll think about it.
Fair enough. Yeah, let's do that. Let's record it. Let's let you watch it back and then think whether or not. But we'll go and have our life for the day.
Yep.
And see if you want to do that another time. You let me know.
Yep.
But yeah. I think that's where we need to live.
So future discussions to have the metaphysics and the moral discussion.
Yep. The focus on an individual. Why does Michael have value? What can he do? Does he even?
Yeah.
It's quite a lot of money. I've had this argument with someone else over the last 3 days, so I should do it soon while it's still in my mind. Anyway, I'll let you go. Say goodbye to everyone who's no one at the moment, so don't worry, no one's watching. And yeah, we'll talk another time.
Yep. Oh, good to chat. I'll see you later.
Yeah. See you then.